He's going to be focused on the ins and outs of accelerators and his experience with 500 startups and some other things, if he doesn't want to talk about that.
Sure, why not? Thanks everyone for having me here this morning. I hope you all can hear me. So I think, just kind of taking it a step back, one of the things that I've learned, kind of been being in Contactually, we founded in October 2011, and working it through, we're now a team of 14 people, raised a round of funding last month, our third round of funding. The biggest problem and the biggest thing that we have working against us is time. We have developers' time. We only have a few, number of hours, that a developer can work a week as hard as we push them. The sales team only has, 8 or 9 hours a day where they can actually reach people, 12 if they call people in Australia and Thailand, etc. And so, we only have so much money in our bank account to allow so many, months of surviving. And the fact that we raised a round of funding last year or a couple months ago was more than anything else was to just give us more time to keep on executing on our vision and really grow to the point where the money that's coming in the bank account exceeds the money leaving the bank account. So now so is everyone here working on a startup in some extent? Who here is working full time? All right, who here is working part-time? All right, literally half and half. So even the people full-time, you're probably working, maybe 8, 9, 10 hours a day. And I mean, that's honestly, and for the people part-time, maybe 3 or 4, maybe 10 hours a week. So with Contactually, before we kind of really joined an accelerator, we were maybe working 5 or 6 hours a week on our product. We had everything else. One of us had a day job, the other of us had contracting work, and we didn't really have as much time to focus on our product. So the real value of a accelerator is literally that. It's an accelerator because for 4 months you go from working 4, 8, 10 hours a day working on your product and in meetings, and one day leads to another, to all of a sudden realizing that 4 months from now you are speaking to some of the top investors in the world. TechCrunch and all the other top press will be writing about you, or at least you hope they will, and you, by God, better be a real company. And so that mindset all of a sudden changes everything about you, because you go from working 3 or 4 hours a day, maybe not making that much progress, to working 18 hours a day. And after an 18-hour day where you're working as fast as possible, and if a meeting goes longer than 15 minutes, that you're wasting your time, so you simply walk away from the meeting. Instead of going home to your creature comforts of your fiance or girlfriend and dog and rent and comfy TV and friends and beer and everything, you go to an empty apartment 2 blocks away with nothing but 3 mattresses on the floor, which is fine because all you're doing there is you're quickly sleeping for 4 or 5 hours, showering, and then going back into the office. So that was my experience with the 500 startups. We joined 500 startups in October 2011. That was when we took our first round of funding. And for 4 months, we spent, myself and my 2 other co-founders did nothing but focus on product, marketing, sales, and fundraising. And that was it. Unfortunately, yes, it was incredibly hard on ourselves and our loved ones, but it turned us from 3 people who are kind of working on this idea to a real company that on the last day of 500 startups, we did get that TechCrunch write-up, and we did get the VentureBeat write-up, and we did get everything else. But more importantly, it showed that we were a real company, and that we had proved out our idea. So an incubator provides a kind of few core things. Obviously having the brand behind you is great. Being able to say on your website or to investors, Y Combinator backed us, or 500 startups, or Dream It, or Techstars is really helpful. More importantly, the mentor network is amazing. The fact that you can speak to some of the top CEOs in the country, people who are right alongside you, people who are maybe 9 or 10 months ahead of you, and say all right, how do I not make the mistakes that you did? And how can you connect me to investor X, Y, and Z? That's definitely great. But really, and I think this is what people don't realize, that you can get outside of an incubator, is that time crunch. if you were to sit here today and say, all right, 4 months from now, I want to make sure that I get press write-up. Do you think you could? You probably could if you really push yourself. And 500 startups, I mean, it was great for all the reasons. It was awesome having Dave McClure scream at me as I'm practicing my demo saying, I don't fucking understand what you're saying. That was great. But in hindsight, during it was terrible, degrading, everything. But really what it was all about was, just having this time. Where all of a sudden you realize, how scarce time is, so you can really focus on pushing it as hard as you can. Now, obviously, it seems to be that that incubators and accelerators are really the kind of top ways to get into to kind of grow your startup from day one. And so, if I were to kind of give you a few real core executable pieces of advice. What I've seen that incubators look for, having helped them, having helped 500 startups as well as a few other incubator programs, really, pick out the right companies. One is show that you can execute. That's the most important thing. No one actually cares about your idea anymore. I've seen the worst ideas go into 500 startups, and the best ideas come out. But they really want to show that you know how to execute, that you can work as hard to get investors, to grow your marketing team, grow your sales team, grow your user base, build your product. They also look, most importantly, for tech talent. And that is probably the hardest thing, especially in this city, but really anywhere else, is that they want to show that you can technically execute it. Third is to show that you have really done your research. That that this is an idea that isn't just a cool application, but actually really has some legs behind it. That there is a huge market for it. Now they can take what seemed like a good idea at the time, and they can turn it into a great idea. They can help you destroy your idea. They can help you, kind of pivot into something completely different. And you'll find it's like one of those things like, people really are scared going into accelerators, going like, oh, what if my idea sucks? Like, don't worry about that. Like, they will force a great company to come out of it. But really, and a lot of people kind of come up to me and they ask like, oh, how do I get into 500 startups? Or how do I get into Techstars or Y Combinator? As if not getting in will basically be the doom of their company. And I mean, one of the most important things that I want to kind of relate to you is that you don't need an accelerator. That being told by someone else out in Silicon Valley that, all right, you're kind of good enough to come sit in my office for a few months and maybe I'll show you around some investors. You don't need that. What you need is to realize how crucial time is and to make sure that every second that you and your team is putting into your company is for the right reasons. Any questions? Cool.
Come on, guys, don't be shy.
You said you had three. It was you and two others who found
Yeah.
it. How'd you guys divide up? Like, who was doing what and like everything?
That's a great question. So I guess the core, if you were kind of split the team into like makers and managers. So we had two developers, myself and one other co-founder, and then we had one who's sales and marketing. And that was hugely important for us because for me as a developer, sales and marketing and what Cesar talked about, I'm terrified of. At least I was back then. So in terms of roles, I mean, it really kind of came down to very simple reasons, simple things. So we had one of us who was doing nothing but working on the product, heads down coding all day, wouldn't take any meetings, just focusing on product. One focusing just on sales and marketing, and then myself who is focused on fundraising and kind of really networking, getting as much as we can in our few months out in Silicon Valley. So, yeah.
Did you guys change or pivot much during the course of the 500 startups?
No, and
What's the biggest change sort of happened between starting and...
Yeah, and I think maybe I oversold the whole like terrible idea, they'll make it a good idea thing. It definitely accelerated our customer development process. So we came in with this idea of helping you build professional relationships. And now how the product actually functioned did change. and that was through a result of a lot of customer development. So initially we were focused around being this weird thing that every time you would email someone, it would email you back saying, hey, how do you know VBAN? And you would reply back, and we'd parse it through Amazon Turk and then save it to a CRM. What we learned very quickly is that no one cared about that. People loved our value proposition of helping you capture more information about your contacts and knowing that relationships are really important and you don't have any time to manage it. And so just through a lot of good customer development and kind of working through some other people and being able to turn around to another great startup founder next to you and say, hey, what do you think about this? That helped us kind of tweak where we were going. So.
Did you take any angel money?
Yes. So.
How many people did you reach out to before you got the monies that you needed?
So you really want to know a scary number?
Yeah.
So I looked at some of my past spreadsheets. So we raised through 2 rounds. We raised around $450,000. I have in my spreadsheet, I have around 175 no's. Now, obviously that's split up between people who probably would have actually invested in us but didn't for some reason, later stage investors who are like, we realize wait a second, why am I talking to you right now? Or people who I thought might be interested but turned out weren't. But yeah, I mean, and that's one of the things that was hardest for me is to kind of learn to keep swinging, and you'll have absolutely terrible days. But who cares how many no's it takes as long as you get the yeses that matter. So.
You mentioned a little bit about setting milestones for the startup.
Uh-huh.
How would you draw draw the line between focusing solely on the milestones versus trying to find your own way? Because both are important, right? There has to be a point where the startup will say, well, this is not going to take off. It's time to cut our losses. Or the free flow idea is you'll get there when you get there. Right? Did you guys balance that? Yeah,
well, I mean, I think the most important thing is, and that's what investors care about. They care less about milestones, but they care about looking at charts and ensuring everything is going up and to the right. And literally they'll keep saying, as long as you show a graph that is up and to the right, you're in good shape with investors. So, I mean, obviously it's kind of up to your judgment. We didn't really do much in terms of setting milestones, but we just kind of made sure that we were always improving quickly. I think if you can be clear and and there are certain benchmarks that you can work against. So, for example, if your revenue is growing at less than 15% per month, if your user base is growing at less than 10% a month, usually something's wrong. And if you have 6 to 9 months of that, then your idea is something's really wrong. If you have 1 or 2 months of that, that you need to maybe change your approach. So we did very little in terms of milestone setting and just kind of made sure that we value progress over process. So.
Why'd you guys go for 500 startups? I'm guessing you applied to a bunch of them.
Actually, no. So, and I mean, you'll hear all these weird stories about how people get into incubators. We actually got into 500 startups mainly because one of the partners, Paul Singh, is a local guy. If you guys haven't met Paul Singh, try and meet him. You have to be very sneaky in order to get some of his time, but it's definitely possible. So he's one of the partners of 500 startups, and I showed him my idea, and 2 weeks later we were on a plane to California.
Had you guys built any of it yet, or had any customers? Big on having.
Yeah, so we had customers. More importantly, we had customer development. So we were able to show, I guess at that time is probably 75 interviews with potential customers. So we did a lot of customer development up front, and that kind of proved that more importantly, not only that we were right, but that we had the process in place to prove that we were right and that we were already starting to execute it. But I mean, we probably had 100 users at the time, so nothing. So, yeah. Cool. Any other questions?
Awesome. Thank you, Svi.